Hello everybody, my name is Sam Collins. I'm an international master from Ireland, and today I'd like to discuss an opening variation, effectively an opening repertoire for white against the French defence, which begins of course with e4, e6 and then d4, d5. And the idea I'd like to suggest is arising after white's third move, knight d2, so the Tarrasch variation. And it's a system invented by Victor Korchnoi, and appropriately called the Korchnoi Gambit. And it arises in its most basic form after, for instance, knight f6, e5, knight d7, bishop d3, c5, c3, knight c6. And now, rather than knight to e2, which is the standard move, leaving the f3 square free for this knight, so that white can protect his pawn on d4. The Korchnoi Gambit begins with knight f3, and this is the system which I'd like to discuss. It's a gambit precisely because white isn't going to be able to hold the d pawn if black captures and plays queen b6. And we'll see exactly how white should respond in that instance. But I think the other idea of the move is that the knight on f3 is perhaps slightly more active than it would be on e2. And frequently what happens in this line, if black refuses to take the pawn on d4, is that white ends up taking on c5, and this knight can go to b3 with quite active play for white. So the attraction of this line, I think, is based on a couple of aspects. The first is the universal nature of the system, in that it can be used against all of black's main defences in the Tarrasch. So if we return to this position after knight d2, knight f6 is one of the most popular lines. If we look at bishop e7, which is also very fashionable and popularised by Morozevich and others, white can continue here with knight f3, and then, for instance, after knight f6, e5, knight d7, bishop d3, c5, c3, knight c6. We get into the same type of position, except with black having committed his bishop to the e7 square. Also, if we look at c5, which is one of black's other main responses to the Tarrasch, then again white can continue with knight f3, and if black plays with knight f6, then e5, knight d7, c3, knight c6, and then bishop d3. So this is a gambit which can come up a lot and can be reached by a variety of move orders. Now, there are certain things which black can do to avoid the gambit. So, for instance, he can take on e4 on move 3, knight takes e4. So this is the Rubinstein variation, and you need to have something against this. But I think that just very natural development for white, bringing the pieces out quickly, bishop d3 and castling, tends to be sufficient for a small edge. But of course, there's a lot of theory here. Also, black has this move knight to c6 on the third move, which you need something against. I've always preferred systems based on knight f3, and then, for instance, after knight f6, e5, knight d7, the move c3, and then bishop b5. And then there are alternatives within each of the third main moves. So, for instance, after c5, knight f3, black doesn't have to play knight f6. He can take on d4 or play with knight c6. But it's a gambit which comes up a lot in various forms, and I hope that based on our short discussion of it today, you'll consider including it in your opening repertoire. So hope you enjoyed the presentation.